Hi everyone, this is Chaz versus James, 2019 Perth Chess Academy Term 1. This is played on the 16th of February. Let's get started. E4, E5. Okay, so we got Ray Lopez, Knight F6. I don't actually know this opening. I probably should learn it at some point. Knight C3 was played. That's a book move as well. It's not considered. It's considered interesting by the book. Castling and playing D3 are considered the two main moves here. But yeah, it looks like Knight C3 is fine. I think castling's a bit better. The main reason I stopped here at Knight C3 is because in Mario Lopez lines, the usual plan is to play C3 and D4 and go for a big center. You try and use your first move advantage to sneak in this whole idea of C3, D4. By playing Knight C3, you've turned it into a four knights game. Your opponent can simply play Bishop B5, Bishop B4, and now you're just in a normal four knights game. Maybe White was happy with that. Bishop C5. You're just going to be careful of ideas of the fork trick here. What I'm talking about is this: Knight takes D4, and the idea behind the fork trick is, after here takes, you end up in a position where it's still equal material. However, White's got control of the center undeniably, and Black has lost control of the center. White would just, maybe castle here, and White should be very happy with this. White's got half open D file to work down, and he's got a great development. The bishop coming to G5. Ideas are maybe F4 and E5 and pushing that center. I think the fork trick is best. After knight takes, they have to take back. I mean, they can do stuff like this, but the problem with that is that after this, White just ends up with an awesome position with both center pawns and a great position. I mean, sure, this knight can throw a check in here, and that makes developing the king side, the rook in particular, uncomfortable. However, the center more than compensates for the uncomfortable place of the king. I mean, there's no dark squared bishop for Black anymore, so White can simply go for something like H3 and then jump the king into H2, and get the rook out along the F file that way. So you shouldn't be worried about a counter sacrifice after knight takes, bishop takes. It should not be a concern at all. You shouldn't be too scared to go into this line. There's no danger anyway. You might think maybe this knight can go here, but that actually ends very badly for Black. You can just throw your king back to E1, for instance, and this knight's on pre and that knight's on pre, and they're both defending each other. And so, Black might continue this idea of trying to get a mate or something down here, but it's easily stopped. Just rook F1, and White's going to win quite a lot of material. I mean, there's Queen H4 check, G3, and the queen going here, but yeah, you can just this is on pre now, but the knight situation is still the same. They're both defending each other and they're both attacked, so you can just defend your G3 pawn, and one of these knights is going to fall. Maybe Black can try and complicate with G5, but this is just answered by bishop takes, and White's won a piece. So instead of Queen F6, if he tries Queen here straight away, that's similarly just bad. It's even worse, in fact, because now you don't actually grab this pawn and threaten that pawn, and one of these knights is going to fall, no matter what. So there's no actual danger. So don't be afraid to play the fork trick when you get the opportunity. Okay, so White didn't though. White just simply castled. The engine said castling was best, but I think Black is kind of off the hook here. Black should be quite okay with this position. He probably should be thinking of playing something like D6 now, just to keep his E5 pawn defended. There is a danger that White can always chop this knight off and steal a pawn at some point, and Black doesn't have the chance to get his pawn back. So D3, D6, I think, is an important move here before castling. He actually castled first, and I don't know. Is this actually possible? Can we steal this, or does something really bad happen to us if we do? I guess rook E8 gets played, and we end up losing this as well. Yeah. it's probably okay. I would have just played it safe with d6, but looking at it, it is actually okay. D3 was played. White decided not to go into these complications. Oh, the fork trick is still there, by the way. This fork trick is still on in the position, and white probably should play it now instead of D3. Okay, so D3 it's just a equal position, I think. And you know, D6, and here we've just got equality. Bishop G5. Okay, so it looks like white is going to try and do with a pin trick instead of the fork trick. Chuck this knight here and wreck this pawn structure. Take, you know, knight here, then grab this, doubling black's pawns like that, allowing the bishop to jump into H6. It seems like maybe H6 now is the move. Should just hit that bishop straight away. You know, if the bishop were to take this here, the queen just takes back, and sure, the knight can get a tricky little attack on the queen, but the queen just goes back to d8. It has to go back to d8 because the c pawn was en prise. And black is doing okay. If the bishop instead retreats back to here, I mean, g5 is a bit dangerous. In fact, too dangerous. The engine actually wants to just sack the knight for 2 pawns, because this pin on this knight is very hard to deal with. Yeah. I stopped here because sometimes in these situations, when the knight tries to sack, you can answer by moving your knight and pinning the knight to the bishop that way, and you can keep everything defended. But it doesn't actually work. The knight doesn't really have anywhere good to go, and even if it did, this knight can just drop back to f3 and defend this bishop here. So there's no actual tactic there. If he sacks, you have to take back. And yeah, white is material down, but black's king is wide open, and this pin is almost impossible to get rid of, to deal with. Mainly because this bishop is trapped outside the pawn chain and not on e7, unpinning it. If you just follow the engine analysis for a little bit longer, you've got moves like, I mean, queen f3 just seems like the sort of thing that you'd want to be playing here. Queen f3, forcing king g7. But apparently, according to engine, that's not best. Best here is just simply king h1, and that makes sense. I mean, the plan is just simply f4, and then, you know, swapping on e5, oops, f4, taking on e5, releasing the rook on this knight, and unpinning this knight is almost impossible. It's just like, how do you unpin it? How do you fix this endless pin? How do you rearrange your pieces? Knight here, knight there, or knight here, c3, getting rid of the bishop, then knight there. I mean, and white can probably even here in this position, after takes, can look to maybe just swap the bishop for the knight. Though I wouldn't want to. I'd want to have the constant threat of this knight coming in here. That's why bishop e6 is needed, just to stop knight d4, so you can just chop it off the moment it hops in there. But yeah, king h1, that's really looking good with the idea of pawn up takes. White's got a spectacular position. So you can't play a move like g5 here. So yeah, black has still got this problem of having to deal with the fact that this knight's about to jump into d5. According to the engine, knight d4 is the way to play. Oops. And after knight d4, knight takes, bishop takes. And what if he throws this in? Isn't this a problem? Oh no, you get g5 now, and because this knight's not here, you can't swap the knight for the g pawn anymore. So yeah, knight d4, that's good. Engine's found something great there. Knight d4, with the idea of playing g5 later. First, trade these knights off so there's no knight sack on g5, then go g5. And once this bishop is stuck here, encased in pawns, you know, so for example, yeah, we get to this situation here. The bishop is just kind of bad for a long time. It's just got nowhere to go. White can try and open the position up a bit, but you can't ever get f4 in with 2 pawns guarding f4. So this is actually quite common for these kinds of positions. I haven't been in one of these positions personally in a very long time, but I'm beginning to remember it all now. You do have you do have this idea: swap off this knight, get g5 in. So in this position, black played bishop g4, which according to the engine is actually fine. I'd like to know what the answer to this is, threatening to double the pawns. Maybe black just answers with the same threat of his own, knight d4. And you know, if this sort of move gets played, takes, and then bishop h6. Oh, the bishop's on pre. Haha, I actually missed that, and you just saw it now. So yeah, knight d4 is good. So um, so yeah, if we go here, knight d4, that's really good because the bishop being on b5 gives black an extra tempo. Okay, so bishop g4 is actually fine, but as you can see, it's not clear cut. This is not a simple position. There are complications going on here. Both players are trying to wreck each other's kingside pawn structure, and yeah, this bishop just sitting on b5 gives black that extra tempo that he needs. Okay, white actually took on c6, which is what the engine wanted to do after b takes, and then threw in h3. So yeah, white's just following what the computer wants to do. Okay, bishop e6 was played. Seems okay to me. Engine preferred bishop h5. I think maybe the idea was the bishop on e6 gets in the way of the rook. You want to play rook e8 to defend your e-pawn, so you can use your big mass of pawns here to play d5 at some point. But bishop e6 seems okay. Now, the knight's jumped out to a4. Well, I mean, I just want to play bishop b6 here and just say to white, go ahead, take my bishop. And both options look okay. I mean, what black could take back with the pawn and undouble his pawns, but taking with the a pawn looks even better because it gives the rook a half open file against this pawn, and this mass of pawns is going to start working their way up the board and controlling and dominating central squares. So this knight a4 move, I mean, I'm not sure why it was played. Maybe to release the c3 square so you could play c3 and go for a center with d4. I'm not sure if the knight wants to sit on a4 while all this is happening, though. Maybe instead the knight wants to sit on e2, and that gives extra support to d4, and then play c3, d4. So I think the knight's out of play here. Now, black played bishop b4. I think bishop b6 is much better. Bishop b4 is just giving white the free move he wants to play. He wants to play c3. So this helped white out greatly. Bishop went out to a5. And now, yeah, now we want to play d4, but our e-pawn might be a bit loose because after h6, the bishop gets chased back. This is a bit complicated. We want to be able to defend this pawn and get d4 in. And with the bishop sitting here pinning this pawn to the e1 square, rook e1 is not really an option. So according to the engine, just playing d4 anyway is fine. I mean, the knight can't take because it's pinned. So obviously there are some variations there that work out okay for black. But what white did I thought was quite decent. He just played b4, kicking the bishop, and then followed up with d4. And that way there's no pins and the rook can always jump to e1 whenever it needs to defend the e-pawn. So I think that was okay. The one problem with having a pawn here is I'd be a bit concerned about moves like a5 and c5 coming in at a very uncomfortable time. A5 straight away maybe. I don't know. Queen d7 was what was played. We have to deal with this pin situation though first. I mean, this just lets white wreck black's pawn structure on the king side, giving him an isolated pawn and holes to his king. I think h6 is the idea. Let's resolve this pin. If he takes, you know, we take back with the queen. If he doesn't take and he moves back, we now have the option of throwing g5 in at any stage that we want. I don't know if we want to play. I don't think we can play it straight away. I think that still loses because I think this pin is still virtually impossible to deal with. Now that this line has been blocked as well, a really quick f4 and then taking on e5 looks very strong, as does moves like queen f3, putting pressure on here. But yeah, this whole up takes looks very scary. We can't play g5 straight away, but maybe we should just throw a5 in. Maybe that's the best way to play here. It's tricky for black. We have to try and make use of the fact this pawn's on b4, but how to do it is very hard to do. But queen d7 is really not very good. I do prefer h6, but yeah, I gotta find a good suggestion for black. I would say maybe just chuck the pawn up here anyway. And it's white's turn to play, and you know, white has to just sort of ignore this. Maybe white should play a3 so we can take back with the a pawn, so his rook defends the knight at the end of it all. And black still needs a good choice. Another big problem with having these pawns on dark squares is it does open up the c4 square. The knight will be able to jump back to b2 to kick it out a bit later on, but maybe something like this is possible. And you know, the rook moving, I don't know, it's a bit of a mess. We still have to deal with this very annoying pin, but now that the rook has been kicked off of f1, maybe g5 now is an option. The only issue I can see now is there's an enormous amount of pressure on e5 that needs to be dealt with. Can you take here maybe? It's tricky. It's a complicated line. And taking with a pawn, I think black has solved a lot of his problems, but white does have the center. According to the engine, knight takes d5 is very, very strong for white. Oh, because the knight's heading for f5 and hitting this pawn here and hitting that pawn there, and this is uncomfortably placed, and this is on pre. Yeah, that is actually very, very strong for white. Yeah, it's hard to actually find a good move for black all the way back here. So the h6 and trying to get that g5 move in doesn't really work. Maybe bishop c4 straight away. Oh, not there. Bishop c4 straight away. Maybe that's an option. But yeah, there's still this issue here of this thing here. Maybe the rook has to go to e8 first to defend this, and then we can start looking at moves like h6, g5. But as you can see, this pin is such a pain to deal with. And the knight can always go to b2 and kick this bishop away if it wants to. Okay, so, I mean, long story short, I mean, all this pressure is due to the fact that bishop went to b4 in the first place. And if Ad had just gone back to b6, white wouldn't have gained all those free moves, c3, b4, d4, and black wouldn't be under so much pressure in the first place. Okay, so let's see what happened in the actual game. Let's get on with it. Queen d7. Yeah, that just allows this, and that's exactly what white did. According to the engine, rook e1 is the strongest. I think what white did was quite good. Just wrecked the pawn structure. Now the knight wants to head into f5 somehow. It's tricky. Maybe we do need to rip this bishop off first. This knight's just garbage on a4. It's just a terrible piece. And trading it for this bishop relieves a bit of the pressure on here, which might allow this knight to go walkabout. So here I'm thinking maybe he just takes, and after takes back, then maybe we can do something with this. It does look like black. I mean, black's trying to play f5, but the knight here is stopping it by keeping enormous pressure on here. So maybe we should aim for these holes in here. Queen d2 maybe, and try and jump into here, something like that. Yeah, it's tricky. Maybe a4. It's hard to tell. I need to think about this a bit longer. It's a very, very difficult position to work out. I mean, white's got the advantage of better control of the center, but he's got this disadvantage of this knight sitting on a4. And he needs to find a way to play. Taking has to be right, surely. And now it's just a case of what do we do now? Maybe just rook e1. It's not even needed anymore. Yeah, sorry for the pause, but I'm sort of stumped. Both players don't really have a way to play. It feels like it should be better for for white here, but finding the best plan is tricky. I mean, I want to do something like knight out to here. This is the sort of thing I want to be able to do, and you know, get the queen into f3, then chuck the knight into f5 maybe, or actually just go straight for f4 and then takes, and then chuck the knight into f5 with the idea of the queen jumping in and setting up mate ideas and eventually rook lift and things like that. So you know, that's what I want to do. The problem with h4 straight away, is there a problem with knight h4 straight away? I mean, this rook can jump into here, which is a bit annoying. I'd want to be able to deal with that threat. Maybe a5 for a4 first, just to keep the rook out of there. And then after, you know, after black moves, then we can start looking to play knight h4 and then f4 and continue with that plan, and just getting that move in and putting a stop to that crazy rook a3 stuff. So that would be my recommendation. What actually happened was knight h2. So the knight looks like it's heading for these holes here, but the moment it jumps to g4, it's just getting ripped off straight away. The only other thing I can see about putting the knight here is it does allow a straight out f4. But then the knight has to do a bunch more maneuvering to be able to get to the f5 hole here. So yeah, it's tricky. Maybe f4, f5 was the idea, and then the knight jumping into there. Not sure if that's as strong. I really would like to stick the knight in here, backed up by a rook. Yeah, bishop. Whoa, what? No, whoa. Black has just sacrificed a bishop for 2 pawns, and it's not a very good one, I'm afraid. Trying to get some sort of attack on this king. You know, you do this sort of thing if you've got extra pieces around the king and you think you can get the mate, or you do it if you think there's a good chance of, you know, a perpetual check. But here it just runs straight into queen g4 check, and white saw it, and this is pretty much it. Game over. White's got 2 pawns for the piece, but white's extra pawns, one of them's doubled. Well, I mean, you could say both of them are doubled if you want, but yeah, and an isolated H pawn. This is just really good for white here. And now, I mean, this H file is going to be used by white, not by black. If like king g2, for instance, and then the rook swinging across to the H file. Okay, there is a problem here though. There's stuff being threatened on d4. So white played rook a d1, just defend the pawn first. Maybe defending it indirectly through tactics is the way to do it. I mean, I was about to suggest ripping off the bishop, but then I spotted this. And the idea is the knight goes to f5 and defends this. So black can't try and, you know, win a pawn and say, I want a pawn because knight fork, and you'll end up losing the bishop. So using tactics to defend pawns. I think that's better than what white played, which is rook a d1. Now, rook g8 was played. I mean, that's, you know, the idea is to move the king with the pin and then follow it with h5, winning a piece. So, I mean, that's the idea. Sneaky little thing. King h2 was played, so getting the king off that pin. So aware of this tactical idea. So that was a clever idea by black. White saw it, put a stop to it. Black traded in the center, and then plays rook a e8. That puts a bit of pressure on this pawn here now. So there's a bit of pressure going on. f3 was played to try and keep everything defended. And then f5 with a pawn sacrifice. And I think this is a really good pawn sacrifice. It immediately threatens to win the e-pawn. It also threatens the knight. And after white took and white took, white's now got doubled isolated pawns on the f-file and an isolated pawn on d4, which this bishop is constantly eyeing. It's pretty much going to force white to take this bishop at some point pretty soon, just to deal with that pressure. And the rook is now on the e-file and ready to pounce into the position. And if these rooks try and challenge it, this pawn falls. So how to play this as white is a bit tricky. And it's black's turn even. So black actually managed to go rook e2 and get his rook onto the f-file straight away. So that pawn sacrifice gave black some pretty amazing play here. White has to tread very carefully to not lose a bunch of material. So after rook e2, Rook f2 to me just seems like it has to be the move. It's the only way you can defend your a pawn through the enemy rook. And here, yeah, black can take the opportunity to double his rooks. And yeah, if the rook takes, the rook comes back, and the a pawn falls, and the knight's uncomfortable, and we'll have to trade. And yeah, black is right back in this game. So yeah, you know, maybe a move like rook here. Well, no, this pawn's on pre. White will have to take this bishop first, and then after it's taken back, then he'll have to defend the rook, or he can defend it with his king probably like this. But black is definitely, with his doubled rooks on the file, it's definitely a bit of a pain. A move like h5 now is a problem, because if the knight moves somewhere, the king jumps into f6. Maybe white can play f6 first. Yeah, and the king can go to g6, can it, and start infiltrating? Okay, I just looked at the engine. Yes, knight e5 with an interference tactic, interfering between the two rooks. That's actually a classic interference tactic. Yeah, interfering with the two rooks and checking the king at the same time, and this thing falls. Okay, so the king can't go there. The king has to do something like this. And that might give white chances to pin the pawn. It's a mess. I mean, what is happening here? Crazy mess. But that's really what black wants. Black wants a crazy mess. When you're a whole piece down, you want to make it messy. So after rook e2 check, yeah, king here, doubling would have been great. But white didn't play this. He played king h3. And I can't imagine that being the best move here. I'd be very happy as white to maybe just take this and threaten the knight here, and just steal a pawn. And you know, moves like knight c3 can then be answered by rook a3, and it's just very uncomfortable. How do you deal with this? Maybe the knight can jump into here. There's quite a bit of pressure going on here. There's moves like f6 being threatened, or knights jumping into f6. And it's put a stop to black's plans, but black has nabbed an extra pawn, and now the rook can maybe get in behind this pawn and try and steal this, you know, try and steal the b pawn as well. He just has to be careful not to, you know, get mated or something on the king's side. But that's the sort of complications you want to go for when you're losing. So instead, black decided to get rid of the complications. He played f6 just to stop that whole f6 idea. It's quite understandable. But it gives white the time he needs to get everything defended now. So, you know, for instance, you know, I mean, there's this attacking ideas like rook g1. There's also ideas just like, just get rid of this bishop, trade some pieces off. Or just maybe knight c3 attacks the rook and defends the knight at the same time. You know, the rook can get in behind this knight, but maybe white can just defend it with a move like that. Oh, maybe he can't, you know, because bishop takes. Yeah, well, knight e4 and just trade the a pawn for the f pawn maybe is the way to play. I really think just grabbing the pawn straight away was more critical. You want a mess if you're losing. Okay, so f6 and then knight c3 was played. Yeah, attacks the rook, defends the pawn. And black played rook e7, running away. I really do prefer keeping the rook on this line on the second rank here. It's more complicated. It creates more of a mess, and that's really what you want. You want a mess. So like the knight will jump to e4, and this is going to fall, and I'm sure this position is winning for white. But having a rook here is just an extra thing for white to have to think about. So in the, you know, what to do now? You know, maybe now grab the pawn and just let white take this pawn. Yeah, finding the right spot to put your pieces is the hard thing. Yeah, I mean this is winning for white, but this rook is a pain. Okay, but what he did instead is he defended and he played rook e7, and this is a surefire way to lose the game. I mean, I'm sure it's technically a better move, you know, than leaving the rook on the second rank. In fact, according to the engine, you know, it's much better to play like this than to play like that. But the problem is the engine doesn't take into account that when you play passively and defensively, you just let your opponent, you put no pressure on your opponent at all, and you're not, there's no way on earth white's going to make a mistake if your pieces are passively placed. If you want your opponent to make mistakes and let you back into the game, you need to have aggressively placed pieces. So after this, white has sort of the freedom to play this however he wants. He can take his time. He can start challenging on the e-file if he wants. Oh, not with that rook. Well, he has to deal with this bishop first. But there's no pressure on white. So white just took his time, played a4, threatening a5 and trapping the bishop. Black saw it and played a5 himself. White just simply took, and then the knight jumped to e4, and he's got both knights hacking away at f6. There's no more pressure on d4. White has all the time in the world to play this however he wants without having to worry about counterattacks by black. So rook f8 was played, defending the pawn, and then rook g1 was played, and now white's introducing his own tactical ideas, moving this knight here. I think maybe king h8 needed to be played. He has to get his king off this line, and which means he's going to lose this pawn. But yeah, the discovered attacks, just taking here is quite deadly. Black played rook e f7, trying to keep double defense on that pawn, but it just walks straight into a discovered check, which white saw. King h6 was played. Yeah, I mean, trying to keep the king active makes sense. Even though king h8 I think is a better move. Okay, so knight takes, rook takes. This is pretty much over. Just simply rook g4 looks winning to me. You can just then throw this rook onto h1 and then move your king and its mate. I don't see much. I don't see anything that can be done to stop it. King g4 was played, which allowed rook g7 and then king f4. Oh, be careful. I mean, there's no danger. I mean, I just looked at it and I thought, oh, if I can throw bishop check into there, it would be mate, as long as there was no knight or rook. But yeah, okay, that's unlikely. It's still got to be careful when you encase your king in pawns and pieces like this. Rook f7, defending the pawn again, but then rook g4, yeah, and the checkmate's coming. There's nothing that can be done about it. d5, rook h1, and that's mate. So yeah, it's a very interesting game. Quite a few positional mistakes from both sides. No real massive tactical blunders. I mean, the mistakes are, I think knight a4, bringing the knight to a4, putting the knight on the rim was a mistake, and then black responded with a mistake of his own by playing bishop b4, giving white a million free moves to get you under pressure. And then the pawns got doubled. The knight coming back to h2, I don't like that idea. I think knight out to h4 would be better, aiming straight for the f5 square. And with the idea, oh, actually, what was it? No, it was king h1, was it? Oh, the idea is to try, yeah, that's right. So I'm thinking a different line. So knight h4 with the idea of getting f4 in straight away, and jumping the knight to f5 would be better than the knight h2. This was obviously terrible, just trading the bishop for 2 pawns, allowing the swap off of queens, and black was losing. It was more a case of black losing the position himself. Everything was still fine right up until he went for this crazy bishop for 2 pawn sack. And then, yeah, after that, there was, black played really well. Finding that f5 move I thought was great. Getting the rook to the second rank was great. And then, yeah, he kind of just went defensive. And that was the problem. Playing f6 and then retreating the rook back to e7 just gave white all the freedom in the world. Really good game. Apart from, some tiny little things like that, it was a really good game. So I hope people learned something from this. Sorry for the umming and ahhing, but it was a complicated position. It's hard to find the best moves in a position like that. So thanks for listening, and talk to you all later. Bye.